All right, so so I published this paper with Jerry Coyne, and in that paper we tackled 6 scientific untruths or cognitive foolishness, as Andrews put it, and in it is so sex in humans is not discrete and binary. All behavior and psychological differences between males and females is due to socialization. Evolutionary psychology is a bogus field based on false assumptions. We should avoid studying genetic differences in behavior between individuals. Race and ethnicity are social constructs without scientific or biological meaning. And finally, indigenous ways of knowing are equivalent to modern science and should be respected and taught as such. I don't have time to go through all these, so I'll just tackle 2 of them, and you're free to read the paper at any time. So I was very lucky because the Lancet just last week put this thing up. It's instructions for authors. And it says that sex, it's a little cut on the top, but I'll read for you. Sex and gender are often incorrectly portrayed as binary, male, female, or woman and man. But it goes on, giving instructions for authors on how to use this. Sex and gender might not align, and in fact, they both can change, including sexes. So are sexes binary, or are they not binary? This kind of obfuscation of sex binary continues in other societies as well. So this is my own society, Society for the Study of Evolution, and you can see here, sex should be more accurately viewed as a continuum. Beyond the false claim that science backs up simple binary definition of sex, the lived experience of people clearly demonstrates that genitalia one is born with does not define one's identity. This is the Evolution Society. Here we have the American Naturalist and the editor-in-chief of American Naturalist. PPS, sex is not binary because there are birds with 2 color morphs in Europe. Okay. So to make things more confused, you get schools in elementary school in the US using this kind of material to teach kids. So you can see here that in this one is a famous gender unicorn, you have a third sex. And in that one, the famous gender bread cookie, whatever, you have a continuum biological sex. So it's no wonder that my students at the university level are incredibly confused. So this is a clicker question, so I give students, they can vote with clickers, and I can see what they think sexes are. So to avoid the confusion of hermaphrodites and whether hermaphrodites constitute a third sex or don't constitute a third sex, I use the examples of mammals. Mammals do not have real hermaphrodites. They cannot at the same time deliver sperm and eggs and have a functional male and female in the same body like snails can, for example. So here's just for mammals, and you can see this is about 100 students. You can see that the majority of students are actually choosing C. There are 4 sexes: male, female, intersex, and hermaphrodite. And actually, very few of them choose A. There's more people choosing impossible to tell since it's a continuum than choosing 2 sexes. I tell them it is 2 sexes, and the answer up here, the 2 sexes are marked, and you can see that some of them even sigh with relief. They are, confused, and it's a relief to know that what you actually see is what is actually out there. You're not crazy. But even after I tell them that sexes are binary, and I ask, so this is just the arrow, and I ask, how are they defined? So I tell them there are 2 sexes. How do you define sexes? Chromosome, hormonal levels, external genitalia, height, strength, and other secondary characteristics, gamete type, or all of the above. I remind them that this is a definition that would be applied for either sea urchins, humans, or even plants. And here's what they mark. They mark the last one, all of the above, which includes height, strength, and other secondary sex characteristics. How can sea urchins? Have you ever seen a sea urchin? They are all the same. The definition is gamete type. There is large gametes, there is small gametes, that's it. To make things more confused, people are pushing this idea that sexes are assigned at birth. And here again, we have the Lancet, same instruction authors, I just clipped a little further down the line, and authors should use the term sex assigned at birth, rather than biological sex, birth sex, or natal sex, as it's more accurate and inclusive. How can it be more accurate? Sexes are, of course, observed at birth. They're not assigned, they're observed at birth by genitalia and internal organs. And there are, of course, the famous intersex, about 1 in 5,600, that's 0.02%. And just to give an idea, I put that into a graph, and I actually made the purple line a little thicker so you could see that there is something there. It's extremely rare, and it is not a new sex. Is when the genitalia, for example, does not correspond to the internal organ. So you can have a male with internal testicles, and testicles and ovaries are very easy to distinguish at an anatomical level. You can have them mismatched, but that is not a new sex. That is just a malformation of development. It's not a new sex. And just to make it fun, this is about the same probability as tossing a coin and get the coin on its side. So another clarification here is that sex is defined by gametes, but it's determined in multiple ways depending on the creature. So for us, it's chromosomes. Where are we? Here we are, chromosomes. For chickens, it's also chromosomes. For birds, although it's inverse. For turtles, it's temperature. So temperature will determine the sex of the animal. There are animals like Nemo's, fish. They are sequential hermaphrodites, so they can change sex over their lifespan. We are born one sex, we remain that sex our whole life. So mammals are gonochoristic. They get only one sex, they cannot change. You have other animals that are determined by haplodiploidy. For example, male bees do not have a father, so they're born just from the egg that develops without fertilization. So that's another way of determining sex. There are multiple ways of determining sex, but in all cases, it's two gamete types. And of course, sex leads to sexual dimorphism. And it's also important to, people tend to be very confused, the students are very confused about how can we be sexually dimorphic if we share most of our genome. So you take a turtle, for example, the male turtle, the female turtle. They have different sizes, different behaviors. A lot is different between male and female turtle. You can tell their sex, and yet they have exactly the same genome. For mammals, that is a little different because the Y and the X are not present in both sexes. However, the difference is tiny. The Y almost doesn't have any genes. These differences are caused by gene expression differences, and this paper shows that about 37% of the genes in at least one of the 44 tissues studied exhibited a tissue-specific sex-biased gene expression, which can be quite dramatic. For example, this gene here, males and females are quite dramatic. So it's not genetic composition that causes differences between males and females, but gene expression, and these gene expression differences start during development. So why is this important? So one is to understand the evolution of reproductive systems. So for example, the evolution of sex binary evolved multiple times. They say at least 5 times through life. So we need to know what it is in order to be able to study the evolutionary patterns. It's a universal pattern. All animals and all plants, all land plants have it. Some algae that do not have sex, they have sexual reproduction without sex, which means that the gamete types are the same. So whenever you have gamete types, one large, one small, that means you have sex binary. And I think above all, if you eliminate sex, if you think sexes are a continuum, we're going to lose a huge part of biology, which is sexual selection. And without the distinction of large gametes and small gametes, you cannot explain things like sexual dimorphism in appearance and behavior. So here are 2 quite dimorphic species. Why are they sexually dimorphic? The female invests much more in offspring than the male. the strategies that they have been optimized for are different. Females are choosier. Males will fight for access to females. This is true in pretty much all mammals, including humans. In humans, males are stronger than females, so this is over lifespan. This is grip strength, and males on top, females on bottom, it's almost non-overlapping. Going back to that question, you can clearly see that males are actually have more variation in their phenotype than females. Females are more tight around the mean, which is true for most of the morphological characteristics. Males are more variable than females. All right. Oh, and behavior. This is a figure I love to put at my student exams. This is OkCupid, the rate that men rate women as attractive. So this is most attractive, this is least attractive. And you can see males rate females with a normal distribution. All females are a little bit attractive, at least very few fall in that bar. Whereas for females rating males, you can see that most of the males suck. So females are more choosy than males. And I asked this exam to see if anyone will ever put something about like the patriarchy or something like that. And so far I haven't gotten that. Good thing. So I think that the main point here is that the existence of differences between sexes do not mean that one is superior to the other. That is, you don't have, like Scientific American did here, you don't have to make women equal to men to have the sexes both being variable to society. So obviously, women do not hunt as much as men do. This is a fallacy and has been shown to be a fallacy. Just recently was published on May 7, 2024. The existence of these differences do not make one sex better or superior than the other. Both have essential roles in society, and both are essential for a healthy society. In fact, if you make your value dependent on equality, you find yourself in a conundrum when you don't find equality between sexes, for example. When you find that they're different, then they can no longer have values, which is absurd. So, moving on to races. This time is the Journal of the American Medical Society. And this is from a couple years ago. This is the apex of George Floyd. It was an editorial. And they state that race and ethnicity are social constructs without scientific or biological meaning. Do we have races? So obviously we can look at people and have a good guess of where their ancestry comes from. Do we have races or do we not have races? Well, I think the problem with race is that it's a very charged word because it reminds us of racism and slavery and all kinds of past evils. So I find that a better word to describe the variation that we see around the world is geographic populations or ethnicities, and avoid the word race altogether. The other thing with the word race is that it implies that races are easily distinguishable by just a few traits and that they are absolute, that they are not contiguous or anything like that. But races, as I'll show in a couple slides, are quite contiguous around the globe. So the term geographic populations is much better, but independently of what you decide to call population origin is recognized by phenotype and genetics. And this is a paper where they gave AI just pictures of X-rays from the chest, nothing else, just X-rays from the chest. And AI was able to tell the race of the patient, a patient that they didn't know, like a new X-ray, with over 90% accuracy. We still don't know how they do that, because doctors cannot do that. AI can do that, doctors cannot do that. And they actually have not found the reason. It's not bone density, it's not BMI. They don't know what it is, but AI can tell. If you ask people what race they are, and then you give their samples to 23andMe, the accuracy on their knowledge of their own race, and the 23andMe estimate is 96 to 98%. So very few people do not have knowledge or something of their past and get their race wrong. And 23andMe, this is my own 23andMe, can color the chromosomes according to ancestry. So you can see that it colors parts of the chromosomes according to the continental location. So this can only obviously be done if there are differences between populations. How would the computer know to color the chromosomes, and especially parts of the chromosomes? But as I said before, you cannot do that with a single locus. You need hundreds of loci. So this picture is a very good explanation as you go from, so this is an European sample, and as you go from 100 loci, and this is a principal component analysis, so it's separating individuals. Each one of those is an individual. It's, the abbreviation is country, like Portugal, France, and so on. And the more loci you use, the more the populations become distinct. So with 100,000 loci, you can clearly see Portugal and Spain, France, Italy, and so on. Also worth pointing out that the human genome is 3.3 billion base pairs. And it's very, very little that is different between populations. But because it is so big, very, very little is 3.3 million differences between individuals. So even though we're talking about a tiny fraction of the genome, that you cannot differentiate people with only 100 loci, if you use enough, it's impossible for an individual, two individuals of different populations, to be more closely related to each other than two individuals of the same population are to each other. When we put at the whole globe differentiation, so this map here shows big barriers to dispersal that have been part of our evolutionary history and have caused genetic differentiation between populations. So you look at the Sahara is the biggest barrier we have, and you can see that the Sahara really differentiates between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. You can see that Asia is split in two, mainly due to these middle barriers here. Madagascar is fascinating because it was colonized by the Philippines and by Africa. So it lies right in between the Philippines and Africa. And I have no idea how the Philippines, thousands and thousands of years ago, survived that trip. So this also works in smaller scale. So this is the principal component for Europe. And you can see that it sorts out pretty well. You can even go to smaller scales. Look how fascinating it is for Italy. You can separate people inside Italy in the island, Sardinia and so on, based on DNA alone. So that is amazing. It shows a lot of structure despite very, very high similarity between different humans. So you can actually, this is not contradictory, you can have tiny differences between humans and yet be able to distinguish populations when you use enough genetic variation. So why is this important? So I think the number one is finding out about your own ancestry. The two, and perhaps more important, is understanding the history of our species, including the evolutionary forces that led to differences and similarities between populations. So what Joseph was describing, malaria, for example, was a result of natural selection. A lot of the differences we see were simply a result of isolation by distance. So in the historical times, humans used to die about 1 kilometer from where they were born. They didn't disperse very much. This generates genetic structure because if a new mutation arrives in one location, it's going to take thousands of years to spread. This idea of, like me, right, born in Brazil, now living in the US, coming to Europe, it's new. It didn't happen in the past. So we still, despite all the mixing and migration, we can still detect these signatures of our past evolutionary history. And I think think more importantly is the increase in the efficacy of medical treatments, right? The moment that we discover that the genes behind, let's say, cardiovascular disease are not the same for European and African populations, it may change the treatments. It may give new pathways, new biochemical pathways in which you can develop medicines. And thankfully, people are still doing this kind of work, right? So here we have a GWAS analysis showing that hypertension in sub-Saharan Africa actually has several genes that are not present in European populations. The same go for Parkinson, new genes that were not involved in Europeans, and so on. And understanding for our evolutionary history also, we understood the degree of Neanderthal introgression into some populations, and then Denisovan introgression into other populations, and so on. So I want to finish with a quote from Ernest Mayr. It's a great biologist, and I think it is very prescient, 1963, and he's dealing with the blank slate. So he says, equality, in spite of evident non-identity, is somewhat of a sophisticated concept that requires a moral stature of which many individuals seem to be incapable. They rather deny human variability and equate equality with identity, or they claim that the human species is exceptional in the organic world, in that only morphological characters are controlled by genes, and all other traits of the mind or character are due to conditioning or other non-genetic factors. An ideology based on such obviously wrong premises can only lead to disaster. Its championship of human equality is based on a claim of identity. As soon as it's proved that the latter does not exist, the support for equality is likewise lost.
Okay, great talk. Thank you very much. Just maybe I start with one. What are you saying to Augustin Fuentes and Alice Dreger?
Sorry, what?
What are you saying to Augustin Fuentes and Alice Dreger? What are you saying to them? Because Fuentes, anthropologist, well known, high level,
Yeah.
top level. Alice Dreger, in general, a very sound and rational woman, but not on that subject. So what are you saying to them?
I think repeating the words of Ernest Mayr and pointing out the immense fallacy is very important, but in its face, it's obvious. It's kind of like denying the sex binary. Everyone sees it. You can identify by looking someone's ancestry. How can there not be differences between populations? It's foolish, using your words.
Great talk. I have a ton of questions, but I'll limit it to one simple one. We can talk later. So I think you said that it's virtually impossible for people from two different populations to be more genetically similar than people from the same population. Mm-hmm. And one thing you hear from people who claim race is entirely a social construct, they constantly say there's more variation within than between races. So I'm wondering, is that a semantic trick? Or like, how much is that true and how much does that matter?
So the origin of that is Lewontin. So Lewontin was another great evolutionary biologist, and he was working with very, very scant data, allozyme data, from before we even had the genetic markers. He was working with blood types. He was working with whether the enzyme runs fast in a gel or slow in a gel. He was working with that kind of data. And he had only 20 genetic markers, not even 100. He had 20. So what he did was calculate for various continents. He gets a few populations in each continent, and he calculates the amount of genetic structure. And he finds that there is more variation between two individuals of the same population for any given gene. So get blood type, for example. Blood type is an easy one. Every population in the world has A, B, and 0 blood type. The percentages of those blood types actually vary between different populations, but they're all there. So you may take two individuals from Europe and find that one has A and one has B, and two individuals from Africa, and you again find A and B. Oh, look, the Bs are more closely related to each other than the A than they are to another African. Therefore, proving that there is more variation within populations than between populations. For any given loci, this is true. But when you combine 100,000, 1 million loci, I mean, nowadays, this image, for example, is done with 1.9 million loci. You'll see clear differences. Two individuals of an European population are going to be more similar to each other when you are analyzing 1.9 million loci than they can possibly be to an individual of a different population. And this is called the Lewontin's fallacy. And there is a whole Wikipedia page for that, by the way.
Thank you very much. If we come at the beginning, when there was a letter in the Lancet about the fact that, there's not two sexes. The interesting thing in the letter is that at the beginning it moves, and this is typical of this discourse, it moves from the biology of it to the sociology of it, saying that it's more inclusive. You say, okay, or the other ones that they feel that way. That's true, they feel that way. But so in the sentence, there is the one before, I think.
Is it?
You were there.
This is the Society of Evolution.
Genitalia, one is born, will not define one's identity, but the identity is socially. For example, I am more I feel myself more now as a woman, but it's not in contradiction with the fact that there are two sexes. So here the fallacy is you begin, and that's what was said by Jean, that they begin with one meaning, and at the end it's another one. So and that's a letter, by someone who wrote to the society.
Right. Yes, it was an email that we all received. And the amazing thing is that if you go to the website and you look at what these asterisks mean, it says, of course, gametes are binary.
Okay. Okay, so maybe one last one. What I wanted to say. So when you look on, let's say, Faustus Sterling, or people like that, so Faustus Sterling with the 5 sexes, and especially when she claims that the intersex is 1.2%, 1.2%, because what they put in the 1.2% is what they put in the 1.2% is adrenal hypercorticism.
Right.
And this is the major fraction of these. And we look on the statistics.
Right.
So the other stuff, even he put Klinefelter and all this also in it.
Which I
It's just amazingly bad, So, but it's cited by all the people. So what's your comment on that?
Yeah, no, it's really sad. Inclusive, the society she puts every chromosomal abnormally, like including X0, XXY. So the Klinefelter Society actually addressed her comments, and they are very offended. I mean, they are males. They are XXY. They are males. They have appendage. They have testicles. They produce sperm. They're males. But she counts them towards this intersex. And they are intersex only in the sense that they develop tiny breasts when they're teenagers, which they don't agree that makes them intersex. And it doesn't, it's quite absurd.
It's egregious because it's cited like that by all the institutions in the European Union.
It is unbelievable.
Okay, I think great talk. Thank you very much. We have just a small